Today and Across the Fence, the Battle of the Wilderness. We tour battlefields on the outskirts of Spotsylvania, Virginia, to learn how this fight may have turned the tide of the American Civil War. Good afternoon and thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. May 5th marks the beginning of 2 days of fighting that would claim 1,234 Vermont casualties. More Vermonters were killed or wounded in the wilderness than any other battle in the Civil War. Located in northern Virginia, the battle gets its name because much of the fighting took place in dense forests overgrown with brush. Neither the Union nor the Confederate armies could claim the wilderness as a victory. What it showed was Ulysses S. Grant's tenacity and unwillingness to give up despite the cost. Across the Fence associate producer Keith Silva and Vermont Civil War historian Howard Coffin have our story, which begins in a quiet field 25 miles north of the wilderness at the headquarters of General Grant's Overland Campaign.
At the end of bloody 1863 that included the mighty battles of Chancellorsville, Gettysburg, and finally Mine Run, the big Union Army in the east, the Army of the Potomac, came to the fields around Brandy Station, Virginia for their winter encampment. Here in June, the biggest cavalry battle of the entire Civil War had been fought. In this area, the 6th Corps camped, commanded by John Sedgwick. In it was the 1st Vermont Brigade under Lewis Addison Grant. In March, Ulysses Grant came to take command of all the Union armies and to make his headquarters with the Army of the Potomac. They would move south against Robert E. Lee's army on the 3rd and 4th of May, heading south for the Rapidan River. Here at Germanna Ford, half of Grant's army crossed the Rapidan River, that half including the 1st Vermont Brigade. South of the river, they soon reached the 12-mile-wide wilderness. The Battle of the Wilderness began the morning of May 5th, 1864, here in Sanders Field, one of the few open spaces in the wilderness. The Confederates advancing from the west ran into Gouverneur Warren's 5th Corps in this field, and soon the Confederates were digging in to resist the Union advances. The fighting here was heavy and often hand-to-hand. On May 5th, Lee attacked on both roads coming from the west. Ulysses Grant made his headquarters here along the turnpike. He sat on a log throughout the battle, whittling, getting reports, and issuing orders. At mid-morning, Grant received information that the vital intersection of the Brock Road and the Orange Plank Road was undefended. If Lee could seize it, he would cut Grant's army in two. Grant ordered Getty's division of the 6th Corps to hasten there and try to defend it. The Vermont Brigade reached the northern edge of the wilderness about mid-morning on May 5th, 1864. In the fields around Wilderness Tavern, all that remains of the tavern is the central chimney, the Vermonters had a rest, laying in the fields. Until about noon, orders came from General Grant to move south to the intersection of the Brock Road and the Plank Road. Wilderness Tavern is just behind me. About noon, the 2,800 members of the 1st Vermont Brigade picked up their packs, shouldered their rifle muskets, and began marching south toward the deadliest battlefield in all of Vermont's Civil War history. This is the intersection that had to be defended. Already 20,000 Union troops were south of here. And A.P. Hill of Grant's army was coming down this road with 14,000 soldiers. Getty's brigade and the Vermonters got here just in time. There was a brief fight, and they found Confederate bodies within 30 yards of the intersection. Getty's division dug in early afternoon. George Getty deployed his division along the north-south Brock Road here. The Vermont Brigade was put on the left flank, the exposed position south of the turnpike. They were ordered to dig in. At 4 o'clock, the bugle sounded the order to advance, and the Vermonters, with rifle muskets at the ready, came over their earthworks and walked into the jungle-like wilderness. They went about 250 yards before they were struck by a massive volley from unseen Confederates. Vermont Soldier newspaper correspondent Wilbur Fisk was here where the worst of the fighting took place, and he wrote, "They poured their bullets into us so fast that we had to lie down to load and fire. I doubt if a single tree could have been found that had not been pierced several times by bullets, and all were hit about breast high." Lewis Addison Grant said that hundreds of his men fell at that first deadly volley. The fighting here went on until dark, when it slowly petered out. The Vermonters, Getty's division, held their line. When the second day of the Battle of the Wilderness began, early on the morning of May 6, Hancock's big corps had come up into this area. A general advance was ordered, with the Vermont Brigade moving forward, and the Confederates were driven about a mile until stiff rebel resistance was encountered. The fighting went on for hours, and suddenly the Vermonters began to see Confederate troops coming in behind them. James Longstreet had launched a flank attack. The Vermonters, everyone, had to retire in good order all the way back to the Brock Road, where they dug in and once again held the crossroads under heavy fire. The wilderness in 1864 was thick, jungle-like, second growth, bushes and thorns, and the Vermonters had to fight every step of the way. This barely discernible depression that I'm in deep in the wilderness is the grave of a Union soldier. Hundreds of them were buried here after the Civil War. This could be the grave of a Vermonter. They were disinterred and moved to the Great National Cemetery at Fredericksburg when that was constructed long after the war. The Vermont Brigade monument here in the wilderness is, of course, a replica of Old Camel's Hump, so often mentioned in soldier letters home during the Civil War. The monument gets to the terrible cost of the wilderness. 1,234 Vermonters became casualties in 2 days of fighting. Probably 400 of them died. It was by far the heaviest casualties Vermont took in the entire war. On the back of this monument is a quote from Lewis Grant, who commanded the Vermont Brigade. The flag of each regiment, though pierced and tattered, still flaunts in the face of the foe, and noble bands of veterans with thin ranks and but few officers to command still stand by them, and they seem determined to stand so long as there is a man to bear their flag aloft or an enemy in the field. On the beautiful autumn day this monument was dedicated, myself and James Merrill Jeffords had just spoken when out of a clear blue sky, silver raindrops began to fall. They seemed like tears. The Battle of the Wilderness ended on May 7th after 3 vicious days of fighting. Some of the woods caught fire, men burned to death. Total casualties north and south, more than 25,000. Twice the number of the Confederate casualties were suffered by Ulysses Grant's army. Yet on the night of the 7th, Grant and his staff came riding down the Brock Road, only paused at the intersection and rode right south through it. The soldiers along the road here, including the Vermonters, cheered and cheered. At last they knew they had a commander that would keep the war going, keep pursuing Robert E. Lee until it ended. This place may be the most important of all Civil War places because of Grant's resolve. From the Wilderness, Ulysses Grant drove his army south 8 miles to its next confrontation with Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. It came in the fields north of Spotsylvania Courthouse. The worst fighting was here, at the Mule Shoe Salient, a great bulge in the Confederate lines. And the worst of the fighting happened in this area known as Bloody Angle. The Union attacked from the north with 18,000 soldiers, overran these earthworks, and kept on going. The Confederates rallied, drove the Union back, and then the fighting began here, nose to nose across these earthworks, each army 30 ranks deep. They fought here in the pouring rain at point-blank range for 24 hours. The Vermont Brigade came on the field about 8 o'clock in the morning and fought in this section. Some of the Vermonters leaped atop the breastworks and fired down into the Confederate ranks. On the fighting went until the next day, when finally the Confederates withdrew to a new line. When the fighting here ended, the trenches were filled with hundreds of bodies. This now quiet, lovely place was one of the worst battlefields of the Civil War. Yet the campaign moved on south to other killing fields, North Anna and Cold Harbor. On went the Overland Campaign.
Well, joining me in the studio is Keith Silva. Nice work from you and Howard on this fascinating piece of Vermont Civil War history.
Thank you, Judy. It's always great when we can bring viewers a story, even though it's 600 miles away in Virginia.
Yeah, really. Well, something happened behind the scenes during your filming in Virginia that you wanted to share. What was that?
Well, Judy, as you know, every reporter welcomes the happy accident, those moments that we didn't expect and we couldn't anticipate. It adds something to the words and pictures of the story. The best thing I came up with was it's poetic, or poetry. So there we are, Northern Virginia. It's an overcast day, gray, dark, but no rain. So Howard's got me going from site to site. I'm traipsing through the wilderness, the camera, the tripod, all that brush. It is still thick and overgrown. So I'm having my wilderness experience. I keep checking the sky, looking for some sort of divine intervention. Maybe the clouds will break a little bit, because we're getting deeper and deeper into the woods and it's getting darker and darker. So where the Vermont Brigade Monument is, it is about 200 yards, so a couple of football fields away from that busy intersection. And Howard goes into the story about the dedication ceremony in 2006 with Jeffords, and I think Howard's words are that silvery raindrops fell out of a clear blue sky. Well, he gets done, and then I go to the back of the monument where Lewis Grant's quotation is, and I start getting my shots, and still no rain. Well, a couple minutes later, I move to the front of the monument, and as you can see in the tape, it starts to rain. Raindrops start to hit the stone. It's not a special effect. We didn't put that in. That really happened on the number of casualties and also on the word Vermont. it doesn't rain the rest of the day. The shower is probably 5-10 minutes. It passes, no rain for the rest of the day. So what happened? You know, what was it that we were there at that exact moment, getting that exact shot when it started to rain? I don't know.
We call that the money shot.
Yes, yes. I sort of like I like the mystery of it. So I don't know why it happened, but I'm glad I was there.
That was wonderful. Great special effects.
Yes.
Thanks a lot, Keith. And thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. We'll see you again next time on Across the Fence.